Douglas Morrison, poet, died at 27. The Doors singer and the songwriter passed away in Paris. Jim Morrison, a man who sang, wrote, and drank hard as lead singer of The Doors, has died at the age of 27. Morrison thought, despite and because of strategic efforts on the part of his wife Pamela and friends, was shrouded in mystery. He died in the early morning of Saturday, July 3rd, but he was July 9. 2 days after he had been buried in Paris cemetery, before his manager let word out to the American press. Bill Siddons, the Doors manager, explained in a statement, "The initial news of his death and funeral was kept quiet because those of us who knew him intimately and loved him as a person wanted to avoid all the notoriety and circus-like atmosphere that surrounded the death of James Joplin and Jim Hendrix." Siddons, 23, made the statement on his return from Paris, where he, Pamela, and 3 friends had attended the burial at Père Lachaise Cemetery. So far, no marker has been erected, and Siddons said there would be no services in Los Angeles, where Morrison has attended UCLA and began singing with The Doors in 1975. "The whole reason I went to Paris and didn't announce the death was he went there in March to write and rest. In Paris, he'd found some peace and happiness and worked LA out of his system. It may be hard to understand, but it was hard to live here in Los Angeles and live what everybody thought it was. There was no service, and that made it all the better. We just threw some flowers and dirt and said goodbye. There were also no autopsy, just because we didn't want to do it that way. We wanted to leave him alone. He died in peace and dignity. Still, someone botched things up. Rumors leaked out from Paris to London that the weekend that Morrison has died. But when reporters called Jim and Pam flats near the Bastille, they reported being told that Morrison was not dead but very tired and resting in a hospital. As late as July 8, after the singer-composer-poet had been buried, United Press International Paris office was reporting Morrison recovering and being treated in a hospital or sanitarium. A pop paper in Paris ran a photo of Morrison with the headline reading "Jim Morrison not dead," again reporting him tired from Morrison, a minor malady. His death was kept absolutely secret. Saturday night, however, a disc jockey in a local nightclub reported the death over the loudspeaker. His announcement was greeted with surprise and silence. A small current of talk spread, landed in London that night, and reverberated back to Paris for comment and details. There were none. The American embassy didn't hear the rumors until Monday. Finally, Pam Morrison filed the death certificate on Wednesday, listing Jim and James Morrison poet. The embassy didn't realize until Friday, when news agencies began pressing for the story, that the dead man was Jim Morrison of The Doors. Pamela, 25, apparently went back to sleep. Then she decided to check on him. Jim was dead in the bathtub, said Siddons. He had a half smile on his face, and at first Pamela thought he was kidding, putting her on, but he was dead. Pam called the fire department to attempt resuscitation, and the police and the doctor followed all too late. The death certificate listed the cause of the death as a earth attack. Some early news reports said a sudden case of pneumonia led to the death. Sidson said he knew the exact cause of the death, but couldn't describe it in official medical terms. It was some sort of heart failure, he said, complicated by a possible lung infection. Blood probably collected from a clot and worked its way up the chest and blocked her valves, and that caused the heart attack. Sidson attributed the blood clot to physical abuse. Jim was very strong, he said, but he punished himself to the limits. Morrison is survived by his parents, Rear Admiral George and Clara Morrison, Andy, a younger brother, and Annie, a younger married sister. The parents live in Arlington, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C., where Morrison's father works at the Pentagon. Sidson notified them of their estranged son's death by phone. "We knew he was in Paris," his mother said before she got official word, "but we haven't heard from him since he arrived." Neither she nor her other children knew about Jim until Sidson returned from the funeral to make the announcement. In a will drawn up in February 1979, said Max Fink, Jim's attorney, Morrison left everything to Pamela. His estate, songs, copyrights, and investment made for him by his business manager. Morrison may never have even known it, but he was, among other things, part owner of a trailer camp. After Pam, Morrison named his brother and sister. Pamela returned to Los Angeles with Sidson and at the last report was still in shock. Morrison's parents were also unviable for comment after hearing the news. A longtime family friend, Navy Captain Baylor Brown, intercepted calls and said only that Admiral and Mr. Morrison were extremely upset and planning no separate memorial service for their reason. They'll feel he had been buried in a cemetery in Paris, Cat Brown said. Morrison is, in fact, buried in one of Paris' oldest and best-known cemeteries. The Père Lachaise in the final resting grounds for numerous celebrated men and women of arts and letters, among them Balzac, Molière, Oscar Wilde, and Edith Piaf. And in at least figurative sense, Jim Morrison picked in own graveside, said Siddons. He had a friend had been walking through where a week before, and it seems perfectly appropriate, even if he died at home in Los Angeles, we might have sent him there. Morrison's death followed by 2 years to the day, the death of the Rolling Stones guitarist Brian Jones, and it was 9 months ago that Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin died. All three died at 27, as did Morrison, but were Jones, Hendrix, and Joplin deaths were from accidental overdose of drugs. Morrison died of natural causes. No drugs is associated, and friends have emphasized were connected to the death, and in fact, Morrison was admittedly heavy on alcohol, but light, since the early days of the Doors on the Strip, on hard drugs. Elmer Valentine, owner of the Whiskey A Go Go, where the Doors made their first dance as a house band, stayed close to Morrison through the band's subsequent went up and down. Jim wasn't doper, Valentin said. He drank himself to death, but he wasn't a doper. Get that into the paper somehow. That wasn't his bag. Jack Holtzman, president of Elektra Records, painted a portrait of Morrison as a satisfied man as he prepared to join Pamela in Paris. The Doors' last album for Elektra Los Angeles Woman had quickly hit the charts, with 2 singles, Love Her Madly and Riders of the Storm, getting the group back on AM radio for the first time since Touch Me, more than a year ago. The last time I saw Jim, said Holtzman, we were talking about his plans, what he wanted to do. He had founded recording Los Angeles Woman in the basement at their own office. We provided them an 8-track and board. He was talking about setting his sights lower and not worrying about selling lots of records. He was even talking about going back out on appearances. And he was talking about some screenplay writing in Paris. According to Attorney Fink, Morrison was negotiating with one of the top screenwriters to work with Jim on a feature film project. The writer was Larry Marcus, responsible for, among other works, the final script for Justin. He and Morrison had met in Florida during Morrison trial in Miami. Marcus said Frank Lisciandro had an idea. He had the treatment about a guy who retreats from society and goes to fishing village like Morocco and gets involved in gypsy life. But according to Stevenson, the project was dropped while Morrison was in Paris. Another project left incomplete was an album of poetry. Morrison published 1 book of poems, The Lords and the New Creatures, and distributed private volumes of writing among friends. He frequently wrote his poetry with a sense of his voice in mind, said Holtzman. In music, concrete, some music and sound effect, which would be recorded in the streets or on a beach or wherever appropriate accompaniment could be found. He was still experimenting with the form, said Holtzman. He wanted to get through that and then into a screenplay. As it was, Morrison completed 7 albums. Elektra released 1 compilation album, 13, and had planned to put together a second collection of greatest hits. The 3 other Doors, guitarist Rob Grieger, bass and keyboard players Ray Manzarek, and drummer John Densmore, declined commenting on their lead vocalist's death, but it is known that they had been rehearsing as a trio in the Doors' office studios since Morrison's departure. With LA Woman, the Doors had completed their obligation with Elektra and were open for negotiation with other labels when Morrison split. He said, I have no idea how long I might be gone, said Stevenson, and the Doors had no obligation committed to each other, so he was writing a new book of poetry and the group began rehearsing about April and doing some tracks. They weren't worried about a singer. They were just making music, he said. Now, with the news of Jim Morrison's death, the 3 have stopped work and they haven't discussed any new singer at all. It's premature. And already it started. The Monday following his announcement of it, Stevenson got a call at the Doors office from promoter in Cleveland. I've got a singer, looks like Jagger, sounds like Morrison. Want him? Jim Douglas Morrison was born in Melbourne, Florida, December 8th, 1943. It appears he began living about 22 years later, when he had finally crossed the country, where he would enroll in the theatre arts department at UCLA, and later meet Ryan Manzarek and form The Doors. In his official biography, Morrison filled him and the family, decided while his favorite singer actually were, as he also declared, Frank Sinatra and Elvis. And while his favorite food was meat, his family was only dead in one man's mind. Morrison never talked about his family. I don't want to involve anyone unless they want it, he said in Rolling Stone's interview with J. Hopkins in 1979. The Morrison raised Jim, Andy, and Anne in Alexandria, Virginia, in a middle Atlantic port town. Port for George Washington High School, alma mater in the late 50s to Cass Elliot, Zal Janowski, and Scott McKenzie. Slight little Jim Morrison slowly, surely moved onto the literary road in an English class where he got pumped full of classic. Crow Daddy in April 1979 published an exhaustive investigative article by Michael Horwitz, written in the style of an obituary, complete with odding, finger-stroking, chin recollection by Morrison. The younger brother of one of Jim's classmates told Horowitz, "My brother," said Morrison, "was a genius. He knew all about the poets, he knew all about poetry, and all about books. He knew more than the teacher even. Like sometimes someone would ask a question and the teacher wouldn't know the answer and Morrison would just blurt it out without raising his hand or anything." Morrison made the honor roll but joined in no school activities. He had few friends. Life for him right now was across the Jefferson David Egway in a pub in the 30-20 club, where he caught bluesmen like Will Downing. At home, Jim Morrison faced his dad, latest, and only the latest, the then Captain Opet, in a long line of Morrison career Navy men. His mother, Clara, stood by while the captain in ordered his homegrown requisite around. Finally, Jim Paul evaluated his way out of Washington Monument territory to college in Florida. First at St. Petersburg, JC, then at Florida State University, and finally to UCLA, Hollywood, West Hollywood, the campus, then the Strip. A favorite Morrison quote was, "I was ideally suited for the work I'm doing. It's the feeling of bowstring being pulled back for 22 years and suddenly being let go." Jim had an undoing interest in films, said Frank Lisciandro, who met Jim while Morrison, Manzarek and he were at UCLA, and won a lot of different levels, very much aesthetic, that is, in the theory, the history, the politics of film. He never engaged in that craft of film, editing, being a cameraman, and he always had a good musical ear. He played the tinthi of Vito Piano. There was no fret red passion going on. These already being the days, for some people, of love, Buffalo Springfield and the Birds. It was more like bringing wine to a screening than passing it around, but Jim never did anything halfway. He drank to get drunk. At UCLA, Morrison made his first film, an optic disaster as far as his professors were concerned. It's when print lost signs it's showing. Writer Deep Deal described the film as an essential plotless, themeless college film. As Tang film snaps broken, its audience then fills the screen with hand-popped projections. Everybody hated it at UCLA. It was really quite good. Morrison's next cinematic efforts would be the promo films for Break on Throw and The Unknown Soldier. He had Manzarek, formerly with Screaming Ray Daniels of the pop rock group Rick and Ravenson, began talking music on the beach in Venice one day in July 1975. Jim mentioned he had started writing songs and resided from the start at Moonlight Drive. He found jazz drummer John Densmore at a meditation center being set up by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Now, in September 1975, it was time for the demo. Morrison had lead vocals with Densmore, Manzarek on piano, Ray's brother Rick and Jim on the guitars, and the unintensified female basses. They did 12 songs. As best Billy James can recall today, including Moonlight Drive, End of the Night, Brick on Throw, Summer Almost Gone, and Let's Go Insane. James, who recently picked Moonlight Drive to be part of the film Two-Lane Blacktop, was the talent scout company Freak at Columbia then. The Doors had been drawn to him a picture of him and is buried in the trade magazine. James said he was tantalized and singing them to a short-term contract. Columbia, as James guessed, never got around to signing a producer from the band, and the group moved on with James as he turned out to Elektra. By then, the Doors had added Jack Band, veteran Robbie Krieger on the guitar to replace the suddenly departed Manzarek brothers and the bass player. They had made their debut at the London Folk on the Strip. By now, Morrison had developed into a stage performer and built a solid core of fans. In fact, Morrison and the Doors got too strong for the whiskey when he extended the hand to include the "Oh, Oedipal Father, I want to kill you, Mother, I want." I was Ronnie Aaron, in charge of booking the acts, who got the Doors hired as the house band for 4 months. Elmer Valentine admitted that he didn't like them at first. He was kinda ahead of his time on certain things, like swearing, he said. But those calls kept coming in. When that ornery motherfucker coming in, the phones were incredible. We never got that many calls before for just a second group. Despite the firing, Valentine and Morrison became friends, and Morrison, as late last year, talked about having the band show up announcement at the Whiskey some night for a set. When they started getting big and doing concerts, Valentine said he wasn't happy that he couldn't come back to the club. He missed working out the material the way Light My Fire was done, with the audience like a barometer, while they were going to do it just before he went to Europe. Jim tried to get the fellas to do it, and for one reason or another, it couldn't happen. Then the night they were going to, Jim didn't show up, of all people. Jack Tana was with a Los Angeles-based band, Son of Adam, back then, and he was a friend of Pam and James. After the whiskey, he had dismissed the door. They were playing Gazzari's Club, the one on the Strip, and on one night there was no audience except for Tan and Pamela. Is into when the music over and he comes to the part where he freaks out and screams and throw his mic stand on the ground, and he really did it. Even more than that, and they went off the stage and Pamela say, "Why do you do all that?" And James said, "You never know when you are giving your last performance." The public image, says Zach Olsman, he took a terrible drug biggie. He'd given a bad performance, but they attacked him personally. He asked me once what I thought. I said, 6 months from now, all they remember is the records. In the course of those 4 months employed at the Whiskey Jack saw them. I didn't like them first, but I was drawn back. I went 4 straight nights, then spoke to them and I said I wanted to record them. By now, Jim Morrison had begun what seems to be an automatic piloted trip up to the Strat of Rock. If the Byrds were the American Beatles, then Morrison was Yank Yeager. The Doors hit the Matrix, then the bar rooms in San Francisco. Morrison hit Ed Sullivan hard on singing through his now regulation leather pants and the pages of Vogue, where he was immortalized by photographer Richard Avedon and the caption writer who called in Morrison one of the most shaking, loose, mind-shaking and subtle agents of the new music. He gets people, his songs are here, loaded with somewhat Freudian symbolism, poetic but not pretty, filled with suggestion of sex, death, transcendence. The Doors play at their best in the hand, a song that runs for more than 11.5 minutes with words by Jim Morrison writing as if Edgar Allan Poe had blown back as a hippie. By the time of the third album, Waiting for the Sun, Morrison had also begun his poetic celebration of the lizard, sequenced down musically to not detach of the hurt on the album. Most people misunderstood Morrison quoting of himself in Reptile Skin. He told reporter Sally Stevenson, I've always liked replies. I used to see the universe as mammoth, pluralistic snake, and I used to see all the people and objects and landscapes as a little pictures on the faces of their skins, their scales. I think the pluralistic mountain is the basic life movement. It's swallowing, digestion, the rhythm of sexual intercourse, and even your basic unicellular structures have the same motion.